I want to start this morning with something that happened in my office almost 2 years ago because it's stayed with me ever since, and I think once you hear it, you'll understand exactly why. A man named Everett Simmons sat in the chair across from my desk, 73 years old, retired after 4 decades running a small hardware store outside Lynchburg. He wasn't there for anything urgent. His daughter had scheduled the appointment because she'd noticed he seemed more tired than usual, and Everett, being the kind of man who rarely complains, had gone along with it mostly to put her mind at ease. As we talked, I asked him to walk me through a typical morning, and what he described was so familiar to me that I could have finished his sentences. He woke up, made a pot of coffee, and while it brewed, he took 2 tablets of ibuprofen for the arthritis in his shoulders, an old injury from decades of lifting inventory. He drank his coffee, black, no water beforehand, no food until much later in the morning. He'd done this, by his own estimate, for close to 11 years. When his labs came back, his kidney function sat lower than I would have liked to see in a man his age, not catastrophically low, not an emergency, but low enough to tell a story about a decade of mornings that had quietly asked more of his kidneys than they were ever designed to give without support. If what I just described sounds even a little bit like your own morning, I want you to stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through is something that almost never comes up in a routine doctor's visit, simply because there isn't time. This isn't about alarming you, and it certainly isn't about shaming anyone for a habit that, on the surface, looks completely responsible. It's about pulling back the curtain on something so ordinary that most of us have never once questioned it, and showing you exactly what's happening beneath the surface when it repeats itself morning after morning, year after year. My name is Dr. Anderson Coco. I've spent nearly 20 years of my career focused almost exclusively on the health of people over 60, first inside a large hospital system here in Virginia, and for the last decade through my own private practice, built around a single mission, helping older adults stay strong, clear-headed, and independent for as long as humanly possible. This isn't just professional interest for me. I watched my own grandfather's health decline throughout his 70s, not because of some sudden dramatic diagnosis, but because of a slow, quiet accumulation of small habits nobody ever sat him down to explain. Watching that happen shaped the entire direction of my career. It's why I spend so much of my time now trying to catch these patterns years before they become genuine problems, rather than only stepping in once the damage has already been done. So let's start with where this particular habit actually comes from, because understanding its roots helps explain why it feels so completely normal to so many of us today. Over-the-counter anti-inflammatory medications, the ibuprofen and naproxen family specifically, first became widely available to the general public in the late 1960s and through the 1970s. Before then, people managing joint pain or morning stiffness generally relied on plain aspirin, or they simply tolerated the discomfort as best they could. When these newer anti-inflammatories arrived on pharmacy shelves, they felt almost miraculous. They worked quickly, they worked reliably, and critically, they didn't require a prescription or a doctor's visit to obtain. An entire generation adopted them as the default first response to any ache or pain, and like so many habits, this one passed down quietly through families without much explanation attached to it. Many of us grew up watching a parent or grandparent reach for a pill bottle before they'd even had a bite of breakfast, and without anyone ever saying so directly, we absorbed the idea that this was simply what a responsible, health-conscious adult does. Nobody sat any of us down and explained what actually happens inside the body when this exact pattern repeats itself every single morning on an empty stomach without adequate hydration for years or even decades at a stretch. Here's the piece of the puzzle that rarely gets explained in a normal doctor's appointment, mostly because there simply isn't enough time. Your kidneys are 2 fist-sized organs, and their entire function centers around filtration. Every day, they process somewhere in the range of 150 quarts of blood, removing waste products, balancing your fluid levels, and carefully regulating essential minerals like potassium and sodium. In order to perform this filtering work properly, your kidneys depend heavily on consistent, steady blood flow, and that blood flow is partly regulated by a group of hormone-like compounds called prostaglandins. Anti-inflammatory medications work specifically by blocking these prostaglandins, which is exactly why they're so effective at reducing pain and swelling throughout the body. But here's the catch. Those same prostaglandins also play a critical role in protecting blood flow through the kidneys, especially during moments of even mild dehydration, like first thing in the morning, after 7 or 8 hours without a single sip of water. When you take an anti-inflammatory tablet on an empty stomach, paired with coffee instead of water, at precisely the moment your body is naturally at its most dehydrated state of the entire day, you create a scenario where the kidneys are being asked to filter your blood with both reduced blood flow and reduced natural protection at the exact same time. It isn't that any single morning causes lasting harm on its own. It's that this exact combination, repeated day after day after day, asks your kidneys to labor under a kind of quiet, chronic, cumulative stress that they were simply never built to sustain indefinitely without consequence. Let's connect this now to blood sugar, because the relationship here tends to genuinely surprise most people I explain it to, even patients who consider themselves fairly health conscious. Coffee consumed on a completely empty stomach triggers a measurable rise in cortisol, your body's primary stress hormone, and elevated cortisol sends a direct signal to your liver to release stored glucose into your bloodstream. For someone with well-regulated, healthy blood sugar, this is a minor, temporary fluctuation that the body handles without much difficulty. But for a substantial percentage of adults over 60, many of whom live with prediabetes or early type 2 diabetes without even realizing it yet, that morning cortisol spike, combined with dehydration, genuinely thickens the blood itself. Thicker blood is measurably more difficult for the kidneys to filter efficiently. Now, layer an anti-inflammatory medication on top of that, one that's already actively reducing blood flow to the kidneys, and you've effectively stacked two separate physiological stressors onto the exact same organ system within roughly the same 15-minute window every single morning. This is part of the reason why some of my patients with borderline blood sugar numbers watch those numbers drift steadily upward over the course of several months without having made any meaningful change to their actual diet. The habit itself, quietly and invisibly, is contributing to that upward drift. Blood pressure is the next thread in this story, and it tends to catch even careful, attentive patients completely off guard. Anti-inflammatory medications are well documented throughout medical research to cause measurable increases in blood pressure, even in people who have never had a blood pressure concern in their life before starting this habit. They accomplish this by prompting the body to retain significantly more sodium and fluid than it normally would on its own. For someone who is already managing high blood pressure, which describes a very large share of adults over the age of 60, a daily anti-inflammatory habit can work directly against the very medication they're taking, specifically to control it, essentially undermining their own carefully managed treatment plan every single morning, without their awareness that anything is working against them at all. I've sat across from more than a few patients who were genuinely frustrated, even a little defeated, because their blood pressure numbers simply refused to improve, despite taking their prescribed medication exactly as directed. Once we sat down and walked through their complete morning routine together, the answer was often sitting quietly in their medicine cabinet the entire time, taken with the very best of intentions, before their coffee had even finished brewing. And your heart, of course, doesn't operate in isolation from any of this. Elevated blood pressure forces your heart to pump against significantly greater resistance in the arteries with every single beat, all day long, day after day, month after month. Over the course of months and years, this added resistance contributes measurably to thickening of the heart muscle itself, along with increased overall cardiovascular strain. Research published in cardiology journals over the past 2 decades has repeatedly linked regular, long-term anti-inflammatory use to higher rates of cardiovascular events in older adults specifically, particularly when that use is combined with chronic dehydration and kidney stress, which is precisely the pattern we've been walking through together this morning. Your kidneys, your blood pressure, and your heart are not three separate, unrelated stories playing out independently inside your body. They are one deeply interconnected system, and this single, seemingly small morning habit reaches into all three at once, quietly, patiently, without ever announcing itself along the way. Let's not overlook the joints either, since ironically, joint discomfort is usually the entire original reason this habit began in the first place for most people. Chronic joint inflammation, the kind responsible for that familiar stiffness so many of us feel first thing in the morning, often improves meaningfully with proper hydration, gentle, consistent movement, and anti-inflammatory foods woven into the diet, not medication alone as the sole strategy. When someone relies exclusively on a pill every single morning without ever addressing hydration or gentle movement alongside it, they end up managing the surface symptom while allowing the underlying inflammatory pattern to continue completely unaddressed beneath it. Some of my patients are genuinely surprised, even a little amazed, to discover that a fairly simple shift in how and when they hydrate each morning reduces their joint stiffness enough that they end up needing medication far less frequently overall, which in turn eases the burden on their kidneys, their blood pressure, and their heart, all simultaneously. It becomes a positive, reinforcing cycle rather than a negative one, and that single shift alone can genuinely change the entire trajectory of someone's health over the following years. I want to tell you about two more patients now, because Everett's story is far from an isolated case, and I've found that seeing this same pattern repeat itself across very different lives tends to make the underlying lessons stick in a way that a single story sometimes doesn't. The first is a woman named Regina 64 years old, a retired bookkeeper from Fredericksburg, sharp as a tack and fiercely independent. Regina came to see me not for anything related to her kidneys at all, but because she'd started experiencing occasional headaches in the late morning that concerned her. As we talked through her daily routine, she described taking naproxen most mornings for chronic lower back discomfort, always with her coffee, rarely with food, and almost never with a proper glass of water beforehand. She'd maintained this exact pattern for close to 7 years. Her blood work revealed early, subtle signs of reduced kidney function, along with blood pressure readings that had crept up slightly over the past 2 years, despite no real change in her diet or activity level. When we adjusted her morning routine together, adding water first, food before medication, and a genuine daily check-in about whether she actually needed the anti-inflammatory that particular morning, both her headaches and her blood pressure improved within a matter of weeks. The second is a man named Douglas Prentice, 70 years old, a retired high school football coach from Roanoke, the kind of man who spent his entire career telling young athletes to push through discomfort, and who naturally carried that same mindset into his own health decisions. Douglas came to see me because he'd noticed unusual swelling in his ankles by the end of most days, something he initially dismissed as simply a normal part of getting older. When I asked about his mornings, he described almost the identical pattern as Everett and Regina before him. Anti-inflammatory medication for chronic knee pain from decades on the football field, black coffee immediately after, no water beforehand, food sometimes not until well past noon. Douglas had followed this exact routine for well over a decade, possibly longer, by his own admission. His blood work revealed the same quiet, subtle signs of reduced kidney function that I'd now come to recognize as an unmistakable pattern. What struck me most about Douglas's case, and what I think is worth sharing with you directly, is that he told me afterward he genuinely had no idea any of this was connected. In his mind, his morning pain reliever, his coffee, and his afternoon ankle swelling existed as 3 completely separate, unrelated facts about his health, when in reality they were 3 chapters of the exact same story. This brings me to the single biggest mistake I encounter around this particular issue in my practice, over and over again, across patients who otherwise have very little in common with one another. People assume that because a medication sits openly on a pharmacy shelf without requiring any prescription or doctor's approval, it must therefore be gentle enough for daily, long-term, indefinite use without any meaningful risk attached to it. That assumption is completely understandable on the surface, but it simply isn't accurate once you understand the full picture. Available without a prescription does not mean consequence-free, particularly not when the medication in question is combined with chronic dehydration, taken repeatedly on an empty stomach, and continued every single morning for years or even decades on end without ever being reevaluated. The actual mistake here isn't taking the medication occasionally, when it's genuinely needed for real significant pain. The mistake is allowing it to quietly become an automatic, unquestioned, almost ritualistic part of the morning routine, taken without ever pausing to genuinely ask whether the body truly needs it on that particular day, and without ever giving the kidneys the hydration and nutritional support they need to process it as safely as possible. So let's talk about exactly what you should do differently, because simply understanding a problem without a clear, practical next step isn't especially useful to anyone watching this. I want to walk you through 4 specific concrete changes, one at a time. The first change is deceptively simple, yet genuinely powerful in its effect. Before your coffee, and before any medication whatsoever, drink a full glass of water, somewhere in the range of 8 to 12 ounces, immediately upon waking, before you do anything else. This single small change rehydrates your kidneys before they're ever asked to perform any actual filtering work that morning, and it costs you less than a single minute out of your entire day. The second change is to eat something small before taking any anti-inflammatory medication, even something as modest as a few plain crackers, a slice of toast, or half a banana. Having food in your stomach measurably reduces the stress these medications place on both your kidneys and your digestive system simultaneously, and it's a change that requires essentially no extra time or effort once it becomes part of your routine. The third change is to genuinely pause each morning and honestly evaluate your actual pain level before reaching for medication purely out of ingrained habit. Some mornings, you may find your stiffness is mild enough that proper hydration and a few minutes of gentle stretching handle it entirely on their own, without any medication at all. Other mornings, you may genuinely need it, and that's completely fine too. The goal here isn't to eliminate the medication from your life entirely. The goal is to make sure you're choosing to take it deliberately, rather than reaching for it automatically without a second thought. The fourth and final change, and this is the one that matters most for anyone taking these medications on any kind of regular basis, is to bring this exact conversation directly to your own physician at your very next appointment. Ask them plainly whether your kidney function has been checked recently, and ask directly whether your current approach to pain management still makes the most sense given where your overall health currently stands. These 4 changes, taken together, cost you almost nothing in terms of time, money, or effort, yet they address the actual root of this issue directly, rather than simply working around it indefinitely. I want to pause here and be very clear about something, because it genuinely matters to me, and I never want anything I say in these videos to be misunderstood. I am not telling you to stop taking any medication your own doctor has specifically prescribed for you. I am not diagnosing anyone watching this video right now with kidney damage of any kind. Every single person's health picture is different, shaped by their own unique history, and the only truly reliable way to understand what's actually happening inside your own body is through proper blood work and a direct, honest conversation with your own physician, someone who knows your complete medical history. What I'm offering you here today is context and background information that rarely comes up during a rushed 15-minute office visit, so that you can walk into your very next appointment equipped with sharper, more specific, more informed questions to ask. If you take anti-inflammatory medication on any kind of regular basis, I would genuinely encourage you to ask your doctor about a simple, inexpensive kidney function blood test. Something typically called a metabolic panel, which measures precisely how effectively your kidneys are currently filtering your blood. It's a widely available, low-cost test, and catching a subtle shift early on gives you dramatically more options than discovering the same issue years later, once fewer options remain on the table. If this video gave you something genuinely worth thinking about today, I would love for you to take a moment and hit that subscribe button, because I share information exactly like this every single week. Real, practical, research-grounded guidance built specifically for people over 60, explained the exact way I wish someone had sat down and explained it to my own grandfather, years before it eventually became too late for him to change course. And I would genuinely love to hear directly from you down in the comments section below this video. Be honest with me and with yourself for a moment. Does any part of what I described today sound like your own morning routine, coffee, and a pain reliever before anything else even touches your stomach? If so, please know that you are far from alone in this, and there is absolutely no judgment whatsoever coming from me. This entire channel exists so that we can work through exactly these kinds of everyday habits together, calmly, clearly, and without fear, making small, manageable adjustments along the way that genuinely add up to meaningful protection over the many years still ahead of you. Here is your specific challenge for this coming week, and I would genuinely like you to actually try this, rather than simply nodding along and considering it in the abstract. For the next 7 mornings in a row, drink 1 full glass of water before anything else touches your body, before your coffee, and before any medication whatsoever. Pay close attention to how you actually feel throughout each day. Notice your energy levels, specifically in the early afternoon hours, when so many of us tend to feel that familiar midday slump. Small, simple, low-effort experiments exactly like this one often teach us far more about our own individual bodies than almost anything I could ever explain to you in a single video. Next week, I want to walk you through a very specific warning sign that often shows up first in the legs, sometimes years before most people ever realize their own heart has been quietly asking for help all along, and it's something that almost nobody thinks to check for until it has already progressed further than any of us would ever want. You will genuinely not want to miss that particular conversation. Until then, please take care of yourself the exact same way you would take care of someone you deeply love, because that is precisely what you deserve every single morning without exception. I'll see you in the next video.